by saying this letter is from Paul. But when you get to Hebrews, it begins with a story. Hebrews begins by saying, long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through the prophets. So Paul is not introducing himself there. So do we still agree that Paul is the writer of Hebrews? Okay, why is he not saying that now this is the letter from Paul? Anyone? Why is he not saying now this is the letter from Paul, as is his custom in all his letters? Anyone? Food for thought. Now, let's continue. The message of Hebrews. So this week we are going to learn about Christ and Christ alone, and we are going to talk about Christ in two roles. Christ as a priest and Christ as a king. Christ as a priest and Christ as who? As a king. So, but I would like to make it plain to us that Jesus Christ himself, being both priest and a king, he is also both God and man. And therefore my first talking point today will be Jesus is fully God. Jesus is fully God. But before we get to that, there is something that has been drawn in our lesson for this week. There's a picture there. If you have your lessons in soft copy or in hard copy, there's a picture, and I would like us to just check a few things from that picture. In that picture, actually there are two pictures, or rather it's a picture with the two objects in it. So the first thing is something like a tablet, and the other thing is something like a what? Anyone who is there? Like a crown. Now the first one that looks like a tablet, what is it? This is something that used to be worn by the priests, and we call it a breastplate, or we call it a chest piece. A breastplate or a chest piece. If you want to know the clothes of a high priest, then you can check in the book of Exodus chapter 28. It will tell you how high priests used to wear their clothes. Now these priests used to wear this breastplate. We call it the breastplate of judgment, or a chest piece. Now on that breastplate or chest piece, there were 12 things on it. If you check the book of Exodus 28, just read it. You will see how those 12 things are represented. Those 12 things that are there actually had all the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. If you can count, actually they're even on the front of our lesson, this thing here. If you can count, there are 12 of them. And the other two added. One on the left and another one on the right. Now the 12 had the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. And when the priest could carry these things in his cloth and enter into the most holy place, it meant that he has carried all the burden of the sins of all the people of Israel. Because Israel had all the 12 tribes. And if you also check, you realize the other two things on the left and on the right, and they had a name. Who knows the name of those two things? On the left and on the right. We are still on the breastplate or the chest piece. Anyone? Okay, go read Exodus chapter 28. Those things, one was called the Urim and the other one was called the Thummim. So the Urim and the Thummim. Now the Urim could shine bright if the prayers of the priesthood were accepted by God. But if God was like, no, that one I'm not going to answer, then the Thummim would show what? Will show some smoky cloud around it. So those were the symbols of the past, some of the things that were in the breastplate, which were worn by the high priest. Now, so we are having the breastplate or the chest piece. And the other thing that we are having is the crown. And that crown represents kingship. Sindio? If you see a crown, that represents that somebody has a throne, and that is someone's kingship. So that is it about our picture. Let's get to our memory text again. This is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty of the heavens. Now, this person is a high priest, number one. And this high priest is seated on a throne. So we're having a high priest who is occupying a throne, and a throne is occupied by who? A king. And that's why we are saying that Christ is both a high priest and a king. But one bold statement that to take home today is that the priesthood of Christ is what enables his kingship. It is the priesthood of Christ that enables his kingship. So he is a priest, and he is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heavens. So he's seated on the right hand of a throne. Now, seated here has a meaning. To sit does not just mean that now Christ has just sat on the right hand of the majesty of heavens. But it means that this Christ, who is a high priest, has taken a position of authority. So the statement seated means taking the position of what? Of authority. Are we together? Happy Sabbath class. Happy day. Thank you. So Jesus is our king. Jesus is our high priest. That is number one, we are covered.